can see that Meghan has a great curl to her hair. She has a youthful infrabrow fullness. She has a flatter nasal bridge, a broad nasal base, and some tip bulbosity.
What if the version people think they know about Meghan Markle isn't as clear as it once seemed, and suddenly small details start making people look twice?
I do believe that Meghan Markle did have a conservative rhinoplasty surgery. Now, this nose job did a lot for Meghan Markle. What it did was it brought focus back to her gorgeous eyes and her beautiful smile. A nose really can't make you beautiful because she was already beautiful. This just put the focus back on her other gorgeous features.
We're going to start with Meghan Markle. She's been in the news recently. She's kind of always in the news. I think she's a very attractive biracial girl or woman. Looks like possible tip graft and more tip projection, as well as the nostrils narrowing, bridge being more defined. So those are all telltale signs of a rhinoplasty being done.
Right now, the internet is moving fast. Conversations are stacking up, and Candace Owens has stepped directly into the center of it all with claims that are making people stop and rethink what they're seeing.
Meghan Markle. Has she gone under the knife? Let's start by looking at her from the age of 17 to today at the age of 38. Are you seeing any obvious changes here? Well, I'd like to have you focus on her nose and her lips. Those are two areas that we're really going to focus.
From subtle shifts that fans keep pointing out to side-by-side comparisons spreading rapidly across platforms, this situation has picked up serious momentum and shows no sign of slowing down. Online, people are asking bigger questions than before, sharing stronger takes, and trying to separate what actually adds up from what might just be speculation. Candace Owens isn't holding back either, putting her perspective out in a way that's driving strong reactions, with supporters backing her position while critics push back just as aggressively. And in the middle of all that noise, fans are trying to connect the dots and understand what the full picture really looks like.
A deep dive into Meghan Markle's ever-changing face. Same woman, different face. I have nothing against plastic surgery. God knows if I could afford it, I'd probably have something done. But Meghan Markle takes this to a completely different level. Believe it or not, you're gonna see and you're gonna tell me that if you saw these two women out in the street, you would think that they're the same women.
Before we go further, make sure you hit subscribe and stay locked in, because what comes next goes even deeper. This is Palace Loop, where the story always goes beyond the surface. Now stop for a moment, because this was never really about appearance, not even close.
Meghan is her teeth. Pretty obvious. She probably did veneers and some work on her teeth. When you see younger pictures of her, she had teeth that had a lot of gaps in them, a little wider, a little smaller, and now she has this really bright, amazing smile. You know, people shouldn't underestimate how much that adds to somebody's look. Not only prettier, but again, younger, just more attractive, everything. So I think it was done well and not overdone, and I think it was a good job. One of the things that's pretty obvious is probably in her 20s or 30s or sometime around, a little bit younger, she did her nose. Rhinoplasty, again, is something that the noses don't naturally shrink, take more contour, tip doesn't raise, nostrils don't come in on their own. So I'm kind of giving away, but that's what I noticed in her nose. So we look at her when she was younger, her nose was more bulbous, the nostrils were a little wider, the bridge of her nose wasn't as defined. And then as we move into, like I said, photos of her a little bit older, we see that the nose has shrunk down. The tip looks like possible tip graft and more tip projection, as well as the nostrils narrowing, bridge being more defined. So those are all telltale signs of a rhinoplasty being done.
And if it had only been about looks, this entire conversation would have faded out a long time ago without anyone paying this level of attention. When Candace Owens brought up Meghan Markle, she wasn't focusing on surface details or trying to break down small features. She went in a completely different direction, one that felt deeper and far more uncomfortable for people watching. She started questioning the timing, the pattern, and most importantly, why these changes seem to happen in similar moments, especially when pressure starts building. And that is exactly what keeps people locked into this topic without looking away. Because it doesn't feel random, and it doesn't feel like typical online chatter either, since people don't suddenly become this invested in cosmetic changes, especially in an industry where that kind of discussion is constant and usually passes without much attention. What actually caught people's focus was something else entirely.
Meghan Markle gets some sort of nose job or plastic surgery. That is a question I have been asking myself after people started to point out that, hey, her nose looks a bit different in her birthday picture. And not to mention the fact that we really haven't seen her in a month.
A pattern that started forming over time. A cycle that became harder to ignore the more it repeated itself. Moments where things go quiet, attention fades, and then suddenly there's a return that looks different, sharper, more refined. often followed by a new explanation that fits the moment, and then the same thing seems to happen again. And once people begin noticing that repetition, it becomes difficult to unsee it, because that is the point where everything starts to shift and the conversation moves into something much more focused.
Growing speculation that Meghan Markle went under the knife before her Paris disaster trip designed to traumatize Prince Harry, with that journey through Paris emulating that.
So pay attention, because this is the moment where everything begins to turn. Once people begin noticing a pattern, it stops being just about appearance and starts feeling more like strategy, like control over the narrative, control over criticism, and control over how everything is presented to the public. Candace Owens didn't create that perception. She simply gave a voice to something people were already sensing but couldn't fully put into words.
Gone into the doctor and said, give me this look. Like, because these trans, I don't know, we just call it trans women, look now like the Hollywood girls. They're all getting the same, like the buccal fat removal.
Because you can't consistently promote authenticity while repeatedly adjusting your image whenever pressure builds. And you can't speak about empowerment while stepping away the moment things become uncomfortable. This isn't about judgment, it's about timing and how everything lines up. A lot of people didn't catch it at first, but not everyone missed it, because some noticed early on the shifts, the changes, and how they seemed to follow moments of controversy almost too closely to ignore. And now there's a question that keeps coming back, one that still doesn't have a clear answer.
She suffers from such a rare disorder of being unable to just be a human.
If the image keeps changing to avoid pressure, what happens when that pressure doesn't go away? That's where things start to break down. Because to really understand why trust began to shift, you have to go back much earlier, before the fame, before the messaging, before everything became so carefully presented, back to the version that didn't need protecting. You have to go all the way back, before the spotlight, before the speeches, and before Meghan Markle became a fully shaped public image. Early photos of Meghan Markle show something noticeably different, a look that feels more natural and still developing in the way youth typically is, with softer lines, a wider nasal base, a more rounded tip, and fullness under the brows that reflects natural structure rather than design. Nothing appears overly sharp, nothing looks sculpted for attention, and nothing feels like it's trying to perform. It simply reflects a stage where features are still settling and evolving on their own.
Picture. Now, she does still seemingly have the little bit of the bump here, which makes me a little less convinced that she had some sort of nose job in a way, because if you would fix this, why don't you fix that too? And somebody also mentioned that, well, hey, when you purse your lips like that, your nose does tend to move in a particular way where this sort of slope thing could disappear.
Pause there for a moment, because this part carries more weight than most people initially realize. Many people scroll past this stage without giving it much thought, but others began asking questions early on because those details can tell a broader story when viewed over time. Some observers have pointed out that rounded features like these aren't flaws. They're normal, strong, and in many cases part of a structure that supports natural balance and function. They aren't things that need correction. They're simply part of how features naturally form. But as time moves into the early 20s, subtle changes begin to appear, with the hairline looking more defined, the brows more shaped, and the smile appearing brighter and more uniform, often leading to discussion around dental work and refinement as part of that shift.
The boundary you want to push is your face. Go for it. Go for it. If that's the boundary you want to push, if you want to see how far you can stretch your face before it pops, go for it.
Veneers possibly, nothing unusual and not something rare, but it still marks a visible shift. And this is where the focus moves from guessing into noticing, not accusations, just a direction that becomes easier to follow over time. A clear movement from natural development into something more intentional, more polished, and far more controlled. Make sure you're subscribed before we go further, because what comes next takes this into a completely different layer. This is the point where the change no longer feels like simple growth, but more like managing how a face is presented on camera, and that's something people definitely started picking up on during this stage, with many viewers repeating the same observation again and again. She already had strong features, defined structure, natural fullness, and a kind of balance that many people try to achieve much later, which is exactly why a quiet question began forming and didn't go away.
You go back and you look throughout Meghan Markle's entire career. She never wanted people to know that she was Black. She never wore that on her sleeve. She never spoke about her Blackness.
Why adjust something that already works so well? That's where the conversation begins to shift, because once authenticity becomes part of the image, those earlier refinements start to be viewed through a completely different perspective. They don't come across as random anymore. They start to feel intentional, almost like there was awareness from the beginning, a long-term direction guiding how everything would evolve over time. Nothing drastic happens all at once, but the trajectory becomes clear, and once that direction is set, the changes don't simply stop. By the mid-20s, the face is still recognizable, but it no longer feels untouched. This is the stage that confuses people the most, and it's something you hear repeatedly, that sense of noticing something has changed without being able to point to a single specific detail.
And then, but actually more important again, is the face, of course. And she had a different sort of face, really. She had a bridge that was too defined. So they worked on that, and they worked on the side. And all of the freckles which they used, the skin looked flawless because of all her freckles.
But when you look closer, smaller elements begin to stand out. The cheekbones appear more defined in certain angles, the jawline looks tighter and more structured, and the smile shows more upper teeth, creating a brighter and more refined appearance. Even in relaxed expressions, the lips seem more shaped, without anything looking obvious or exaggerated on its own. Individually, these details don't prove anything, but when viewed together, they begin to suggest something more deliberate. And that is exactly why this stage becomes so important in the conversation.
And I'm also going to tell you by the end of it what I think about those rumors that she may have had some Botox. Well, here she is at the age of 17, and here she is at the age of 25. And this is who I consider to be the natural young Meghan Markle, before she may have had anything done. And when you take a look at her nose, she has a very characteristic nose. She has a bit of a round tip to her nose, and she has a little bit of width to her nose, which is very consistent with her ethnicity. Also take a peek at her lips. She has nice, full lips that anybody would die.
Because observers often point out that the features people try to achieve later in life, that balanced structure, that polished look, and that refined presence already seem to be appearing here, which is what keeps people looking closer at how those changes developed over time. So now the question shifts again, not toward what changed, but toward why anything needed to change at all. Why refine or sharpen something that already translated so well on camera and already carried a strong presence on its own? That's when a new idea starts entering the conversation. Preparation. Preparation for attention, for scrutiny, and for everything that comes with being constantly observed. Whether it's close-ups, red carpets, or a future where every angle is examined and discussed. This is where the shift happens quietly. Nothing dramatic, no major headlines, no immediate backlash, but something subtle begins to register in the audience's mind. And once that realization settles in, it doesn't easily disappear.
You know, so it's kind of like, it's an obsession with this woman. The same thing for the marriage. Remember when she said that she didn't know anything about the royals, and yet she did an interview way back when she was criticizing Catherine's wedding, saying, oh, that was a big thing, that she didn't need that woman didn't need that spectacle and blah, blah, blah.
People stop viewing it as natural progression and begin seeing direction instead, because it no longer feels like time passing. It starts to feel like a sequence of deliberate steps. And once that perception takes hold, it becomes difficult to ignore. The next phase is where everything becomes far more noticeable, because by the early 30s, the tone of the conversation changes completely, and people move away from general observations and begin focusing on specific details, often returning to the same feature repeatedly as they try to understand what stands out the most. The same feature keeps coming up again and again in discussions, in comment sections, and in side-by-side comparisons, because once people start focusing on it, it becomes the center of the conversation. Looking at earlier images of Meghan Markle, the structure appears different, with a wider base, a softer bridge, and a more rounded tip. But over time, that shape begins to look more defined, with the base appearing narrower, the tip more refined, and the overall profile looking smoother and more controlled, especially when viewed from the side. Everything starts to feel more streamlined and more precise, and that is where the tone of the discussion begins to shift away from casual observation. Because this is the point where people start bringing in more detailed explanations, with many pointing out that changes like these typically go beyond simple factors like makeup or lighting, since altering structure in that way usually involves deeper adjustments. And when one feature changes, it can subtly influence everything around it. Viewers then begin noticing even smaller details, looking at areas that might have gone completely unnoticed before, including the space between the nose and the upper lip, which some say appears slightly different over time. According to commonly discussed expert insights, adjustments in one area can affect overall balance, which can lead to further refinements to maintain proportion. And that is exactly what keeps people talking, because it introduces the idea of a sequence, where one change leads into another and becomes part of a larger progression.
Then going down the face, if you look at her nose, 100% she's had a rhinoplasty. So do you guys see that this is wider here and narrower here? And you can see more of the bridge of the nose. It's like more, what's the word right? It's just more defined, the bridge here, where the bridge here, it starts narrow and it goes big like this. And here it's like narrow all the way down.
One adjustment begins to influence the next, not appearing random or isolated, but connected in a way that continues raising more questions the deeper people look into it. This is the point many viewers describe as a turning moment, not because anything looks negative, but because it starts to feel unfamiliar, less natural, and more intentionally shaped. And once that perception sets in, it tends to stay. This is also when a phrase starts appearing more frequently across comments and discussions, often repeated in quieter conversations as well, with people saying that she no longer looks the same as before. And once that idea takes hold, it becomes difficult to shift. Because from that moment forward, it changes how everything that follows is interpreted. It stops being just about looking different, and something else begins to stand out. This is where the shift becomes more noticeable, because it's no longer only about change, it's about absence. There are periods where Meghan Markle steps out of the spotlight, with fewer appearances, fewer events, and a reduced public presence without any formal announcement or explanation.
And they no longer have a healthy relationship with their own faces. Like they think that every wrinkle matters. It doesn't. People look normal.
And then suddenly she returns. But when she does, people aren't just listening anymore. They start watching more closely, paying attention to details that might have been overlooked before, noticing how the brows seem to sit differently, how the cheeks appear tighter in some moments and more hollow in others, and how the overall structure begins to look more defined from certain angles. The jawline appears sharper, the skin looks smoother but also thinner, sometimes almost reflective under specific lighting, and this is where the tone of the conversation shifts once again, moving away from casual observation into something more focused and analytical. People stop making general guesses and begin asking more specific questions, even if those questions are phrased in different ways each time, all circling back to the same underlying curiosity. Why does this keep happening? Why do these changes seem to follow periods of absence? And why does each return feel like a reset? In the entertainment world, extended breaks are sometimes associated with recovery periods, allowing time for swelling to settle, for adjustments to fully reveal themselves, and for everything to balance out again.
A broad nasal base and some tip bulbosity. Now, the shape that we see on the outside when we look at someone's nose has to do with how their cartilages are shaped. The cartilages can have either a flat type of shape to them, they can be concave, or they can be convex. So when we see bulbosity, that means that those cartilages are in a convex position. Convex structures, such as various domes, have some built-in strength to them, so there are some advantages to this type of orientation. It allows us in many instances to actually breathe better.
That doesn't confirm anything on its own, but it does explain why people begin connecting patterns, especially when what they're observing doesn't seem to align with typical expectations, because natural aging tends to soften features over time, while some viewers feel they are seeing something different, tighter in one area, more hollow in another, more refined from one moment to the next, which is exactly what keeps the conversation going.
But now let's take a peek at her 7 years later at the age of 32. Now she's made it big in Hollywood, and what are we seeing with her nose? Has it been thinned a little bit? I think it's definitely possible that she's had some very conservative thinning of her nose and maybe even a little projection added.
Then in the next moment, the appearance can seem slightly more strained, and that contrast is exactly what keeps the conversation alive, because that contradiction becomes the entire focus once people lock onto it, and once they do, they don't let it go. A lot of viewers begin repeating the same observation, saying that she actually looked younger before, softer, more relaxed, and more natural in earlier appearances. And when enough people start feeling that way, curiosity doesn't remain neutral, it turns into skepticism, because if the intention was to quiet criticism, it can end up creating the opposite effect. The periods of absence don't reduce the discussion, they amplify it. And then comes the return, the moment that is expected to reset everything, one major appearance, one highly visible stage where everything is positioned to shift the narrative. Paris was meant to be that moment. A setting built around high fashion, global attention, and constant camera presence. An environment where every detail is controlled and presentation matters more than anything else. It should have signaled confidence, relevance, and a fresh start. But instead, it shifted the conversation in a completely different direction, turning attention back toward the same questions that had already been building. Under bright lights and unfiltered lenses, attention didn't stay on the outfit for long, because it shifted quickly toward the face, where people began focusing on details that stood out more than expected. The skin appeared unusually reflective, the cheeks looked more hollow, and the jawline came across sharper, almost overly defined, while even the eyes seemed tighter and less relaxed than before, and those changes were noticed immediately.
Meghan Markle, the royal duchess, is influencing trends worldwide, including plastic surgery.
She's beautiful. I mean, her nose is just striking.
Yes, that nose. Pure perfection.
Some viewers described the look as uncomfortable, as if the version being presented didn't fully align with what they were used to seeing. The reaction didn't build gradually. It arrived all at once. Comments began repeating across platforms, growing sharper with each wave, with words like pulled, gaunt, and older instead of younger appearing again and again in different forms. Some attributed it to weight changes, while others speculated about overcorrection or external factors. And although nothing was confirmed, the scale of the reaction became more significant than any single explanation. Because at that point, the conversation had moved beyond curiosity. It turned into backlash. For years, discussions like this had stayed relatively quiet, existing more in the background, but after that moment, they moved fully into the open, becoming impossible to ignore and much harder to contain. This moment was completely public, captured from every angle, heavily photographed, and impossible to soften or smooth out, with no filters to rely on and no perfectly controlled lighting to hide behind. And instead of admiration, the reaction shifted quickly. People didn't just question what they were seeing, they began pushing back, with some expressing the feeling that they were being presented with something that didn't fully connect.
This is not my area of expertise, but you have been looking into this for some time, and you believe it is true that Meghan Markle has gone under the knife.
Oh, yes. I mean, of course she has. She's never actually said I have, but you can see because certain things have changed quite significantly. And she's that sort of woman, she's going to do it. I mean, the easiest one is to talk about teeth. When she was younger, she had gaps. And now she's got beautiful teeth, and that helps her give us all a lovely, shiny smile. So that's that.
What was meant to feel like a reset didn't land the way it was expected to. What was framed as reinvention came across to some as forced, and what should have felt like a confident return instead felt more urgent. And once an audience reaches that conclusion, the reaction spreads fast because the focus moves beyond appearance and into something deeper. It becomes about the intention behind it, because once people begin noticing strategy, that is when credibility starts to come into question. And that is where the conversation shifts again.
So different at the Balenciaga show, so I took a closer look. Looking at her appearance from 5 years ago when she was 39, her features have a softer quality to them. Now at 44, there is a notable shift in how more youthful her face looks, and it looks significantly more defined and lifted. While weight loss can enhance facial definition, that alone does not account for the changes that we're seeing here. I think she's had an upper and lower blepharoplasty, and a face and neck lift. The upper eyelids are more on show, there's less skin around the under eye area, and the lower facial contour speaks for itself. Comparing this photo from 2021 to now, the tragus has been slightly altered and the earlobe position has changed in position and also how it attaches to the face. You can clearly see she takes great care of her skin, and non-surgical modalities like skincare, skin devices and Botox will play an important role here in enhancing the overall look.
Yes, one person said she looked as if she was wearing toilet paper. So I think that they were not very impressed by it.
What's quite interesting, I think, when you look at all of this, that she is definitely suffering the moment from a career slump until Saturday. Is this going to turn it around? That is the question.
It stops being only about how something looks. It becomes about control. After Paris, something changed in a way that people could clearly sense, and the response didn't feel calm or reflective. It felt more like pressure building, with criticism being brushed aside rather than directly addressed, which only added more intensity to an already growing discussion. Questions start getting reframed as negativity, and doubt begins to be treated like disloyalty, and that's the point where a pattern becomes clear almost instantly to viewers watching closely. The more the image is questioned, the more tightly it appears to be controlled, and that connection doesn't go unnoticed. People begin sharing their own experiences, saying they were blocked over mild comments, called out for simple questions, or labeled harshly just for pointing out what they believed they were seeing. And once that starts happening, the entire feeling shifts. Because at that point, the audience doesn't feel inspired anymore, they feel managed. And that's where confidence begins to fade in the eyes of many observers. Real confidence doesn't need to respond to everything or control every reaction, and it doesn't rely on constant correction or pushback to hold its position. It doesn't need to fight every comment. It simply stands, absorbs the noise, and continues forward. But that isn't the impression some people are taking from this situation, and that is exactly where the tension begins to build. What people are picking up on instead feels very different, because it starts to come across as pressure, almost like a fear of losing control. A sense that if the image shifts even slightly, the entire narrative could begin to unravel. And at that point, the face stops being about appearance altogether. It becomes a symbol of effort, of constant adjustment, of trying to stay ahead of public perception rather than confronting it directly. Viewers tend to simplify it into one question, but it lands strongly. If there is nothing to hide, why does everything feel so tightly controlled? And what makes it more powerful is that the question doesn't even need a clear answer to keep growing, because once control begins to replace confidence, people stop giving the benefit of the doubt. That's when the conversation moves beyond appearance. It starts affecting reputation, and that is exactly where Candace Owens' comments resonate the most.
Buckingham Palace's balcony is now, like any other influencer, getting paid to promote a restaurant that she's having her birthday at. I guess things are getting so dire we must now get essentially comped a birthday deal. So you can see the links that Meghan Markle has fallen. But when people started pointing out the nose situation, I'm like, oh yeah, her little slope here is kind of gone because her nose sort of upturned a bit.
Not because they are harsh, but because they are direct. She didn't focus on breaking down features or making technical claims. She pointed directly at the pattern, describing a cycle of reinvention after backlash, silence after criticism, and a new version appearing when the previous narrative begins to lose momentum. And then came the line that stayed with people, the one that many viewers kept repeating as the discussion continued to grow. The idea was simple, but it carried weight because it suggested that accountability can't be outpaced forever, and that's what made it resonate so strongly with people who were already noticing similar patterns on their own. By this point, the conversation isn't even focused on what changed anymore. It's focused on why it keeps happening, why each reset feels surface level instead of meaningful, and why more people are starting to feel worn down by the repetition. And this is the part that becomes difficult to redirect. If adjusting the image didn't quiet the backlash, if stepping away didn't rebuild trust, and if a major moment like Paris didn't shift the narrative, then the question becomes what is actually left. This is where everything begins to stall, because reinvention has a limit, and once that limit becomes visible, change stops feeling powerful and starts looking like avoidance. And that's when the tone shifts again, not into something louder or more dramatic, but into something quieter and far more serious. People stop reacting with frustration and instead begin to disengage. And that is where the real risk appears. Because once people stop caring, relevance can begin to fade quickly. This is also the part many avoid addressing directly because it moves beyond surface level discussion. It was never only about appearance, or aging, or beauty. It becomes about alignment. When the external image continues to change while the message feels defensive, that disconnect becomes noticeable almost immediately, and that is where trust begins to weaken. Because when perception and presentation no longer feel aligned, people start questioning what they are seeing. Authenticity is being emphasized, but resets keep appearing at the exact moments people start noticing, and that's where the disconnect begins to feel stronger, because instead of coming across as natural, it starts to feel managed, and once trust begins to fade, the audience doesn't wait for explanations anymore. They start creating their own version of the story. The questions change completely. It's no longer about what changed, it becomes about why it keeps happening. And that's where the conversation moves into something much more uncomfortable. Not about rumors, not about isolated moments, but about the idea of being seen without control. Because there's one thing that can't be edited, reshaped, or stepped away from: memory. People remember patterns, they remember how things felt, and they remember being told not to question what they believed they could already see, and that's what leads to the biggest question still hanging in the air. If the image keeps changing, but the reaction keeps getting stronger, then what happens when there's nothing left to change? That's where everything shifts. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly, in a way that's much harder to reverse. And now it's your turn to decide what you think is really going on here. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those stories where every perspective adds something new. And if you want more breakdowns like this, make sure you like, subscribe, and stay locked in. This is Palace Loop, where the story doesn't end at the surface.